Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a really fascinating exploration, looking into the nature of belief itself.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be digging into how our beliefs actually form the powerful impact they have on us as individuals and on society too.
Right. And the challenges, which seem pretty huge right now for finding common ground in this digital world we're all in.
Exactly. And our source material for this dive, it comes from a really in-depth interview with the writer and neuroscientist Sam Harris.
Yeah, and what's really striking about Harris's perspective, I think, is how he connects all these different
I
levels.
guess so.
Well, he draws these lines, from how our individual minds work right up to these big, complex, global political issues.
And the engine driving it all.
Is basically the power of ideas. That and how we share them or fail to share them sometimes.
Right. So for you, our listener, the mission today, our goal, is to pull out some really key insights from this conversation.
Yeah, things like how our beliefs actually take root. What happens when the information we're all consuming gets so fractured?
And maybe, just maybe, identifies some potential paths, some ways we might move towards greater understanding, maybe even cooperation.
That's the hope, anyway. It's definitely needed.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's start with something really central to Harris's thinking, just how powerful ideas themselves are.
Okay. So one of his core arguments, and it's pretty compelling when you think about it, is that a lot of the suffering we see in the world, maybe most of it, doesn't actually stem from people having, evil intentions.
Okay, so not bad people necessarily.
Not necessarily. Instead, he argues it's often bad ideas, poorly conceived or flawed concepts held by people who might otherwise think they're being perfectly reasonable.
Huh. So these flawed ideas are the catalyst for a lot of unnecessary pain, chaos.
Exactly. Think about it. The road to, well, you know where it leads, is often paved with what seem like good intentions based on a certain set of beliefs at the time.
That really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from just good guys and bad guys.
Totally. It puts the spotlight on the actual frameworks of thought, the beliefs that guide people's actions.
And from there, he really hammers home the importance of actually engaging with these ideas, debating them.
Absolutely. For Harris, debating ideas openly and, vigorously isn't just some intellectual hobby.
It's essential.
It's fundamental for progress, he thinks. It's how we challenge ideas, scrutinize them, identify the flawed ones.
And hopefully move away from the harmful ones.
Right. It's more than just soaking up information passively.
Yeah, he makes this really important distinction, doesn't he, between just memorizing facts and actually thinking critically about them.
That's a key difference, yeah. You can know a ton of stuff, have loads of facts memorized.
But if you can't analyze it, question it.
Right. If you can't connect it to other things, question the assumptions. That knowledge doesn't automatically mean deeper understanding. It doesn't mean you can tell a good idea from a bad one.
So it's the active engagement that really counts.
That's what he's stressing.
Okay, so flawed ideas can have huge negative consequences. Let's dig into this idea of a crisis of meaning that Harris talks about, and how our digital world, well, seems to be pouring fuel on that fire.
Yeah, so connecting this up to the bigger picture, society-wide, Harris points to this feeling, this sense of a crisis of meaning, especially in the developed world.
What's causing it, in his view?
Well, part of it seems to be the decline of, traditional religious frameworks. For centuries, they gave people a shared purpose, a shared morality.
And as they've weakened, along with more secularization.
And the rise of pluralism, lots of different belief systems bumping up against each other, it's led to this kind of cultural atomization, he suggests. The shared bonds are weaker.
We're all kind of floating in our own bubbles a bit more.
Yeah, and digital media, especially social media, he argues, has radically reshaped how we get and share information.
That's not the village square anymore, is it?
Not even close. The information landscape is incredibly fragmented now. We're all interacting with these personalized feeds, algorithms showing us more of what we already like or react to.
Meaning my feed looks totally different from your feed, even about the same event.
Pretty much. So achieving any kind of shared understanding of basic facts becomes really, really hard. There's no common information baseline anymore.
It's like we're living in slightly different realities, curated just for us.
Uh-huh.
And this, as Harris points out, has really serious consequences for having productive, fact-based discussions.
Hugely serious. Just trying to agree on what actually happened becomes a major challenge.
Right.
And in that kind of fragmented space, misinformation, conspiracy theories, They can spread like wildfire within certain online bubbles.
which just erodes that shared foundation even more. Makes
Mhm.
finding common ground almost impossible sometimes.
Exactly.
And he takes it even further, right? He worries about political ungovernability, stemming from how we interact with tech. That sounds pretty serious.
It's a stark warning, yeah. He's concerned that the way we engage, especially through social media, is actually undermining our ability to function together politically.
Oh, so.
The constant polarization, the easy spread of disinformation, the way algorithms seem to amplify outrage, it just makes tackling collective problems and reaching consensus incredibly difficult.
Which leads us perfectly into his points about cooperation. He sees it as absolutely fundamental for humans.
Yeah, and the way he frames cooperation is really interesting. He doesn't just see it as, like, a nice thing we do sometimes.
Yeah, we're on that.
For him, it's a defining characteristic. It's what truly separates us from, say, our primate cousins. It's the bedrock, the absolute foundation of all civilization.
Wow, okay. So it's the essential way we interact to build societies, innovate.
Protect everything we value, basically.
And he connects this to love and rationality as guiding forces. How do they fit in?
Well, he suggests love meaning empathy, caring about others' well-being and rationality reasoning. Using evidence should guide us. And cooperation is the mechanism, the essential tool that lets us actually pursue those ideals together, sustainably. It keeps the project of human flourishing open-ended.
But when cooperation breaks down, the consequences are catastrophic. He points to war, obviously.
Yeah. Failures of cooperation, with war being the absolute worst-case scenario, are existential threats. Maybe second only to, I don't know, a giant asteroid hitting us.
Which, ironically, we'd need massive cooperation to deal with anyway.
Precisely.
So cooperation is vital, but he's also very clear about the huge challenges we face right now. Political fragmentation, extremism, this intense partisanship.
These are powerful forces, yeah. And they're often amplified, sped up by technology and how information spreads now. They actively get in the way of cooperating effectively.
And a key part of that problem is just not agreeing on who's telling the truth anymore.
That's a massive piece of it. When basic facts become contested along party lines, the very foundation for working together just crumbles.
And that underlying faith, that idea that even if we disagree, we could eventually agree on the facts through talking and evidence, that seems to be fading.
It really does seem to be eroding, doesn't it? That reasonable hope that, well-meaning people acting in good faith would eventually land on the same set of facts. It's under strain.
Because the machinery we've built, this fragmentation machine, is actively working against it.
Exactly. It feels like we've run this giant uncontrolled psychological experiment on ourselves with social media.
Yeah.
And the early results, not great for shared truth or even just basic well-being, frankly.
Because the platforms aren't designed for that, are they?
No, their business models are usually about maximizing engagement, clicks, often through outrage, fostering understanding or truth. That wasn't really the design brief.
So the incentives actually push towards more fragmentation, more division.
Often, yeah. It's a tough situation.
Now, he does mention religion sometimes providing a kind of shared identity that resists this fragmentation.
Yeah.
But he has reservations too, right?
Yeah, he does. While religious groups can offer strong shared identity, which can be a buffer against atomization, Harris argues they often rely on beliefs that aren't justifiable by reason, beliefs based on faith. And he sees that as inherently divisive because faith, by definition, isn't based on shared evidence.
So it can be a conversation stopper, in his view, hindering open inquiry.
That's his concern, yeah. His primary hope seems to rest more on reason, on open-ended evidence-based conversation, even if it involves billions of people.
While acknowledging the modern world makes that incredibly difficult, he calls platforms like Facebook a hallucination machine. What does he mean by that?
It's a striking phrase, isn't it? He means that the illusion of connection on these massive platforms can mask a deeper problem.
Collective derangement.
Something like that. The sheer amount of misinformation, the algorithms pushing emotionally charged stuff, it can create this really distorted view of reality, a kind of shared delusion, making it super hard to agree on basic facts.
This brings us to his idea about two levels of meaning in our lives, the superficial and the fundamental.
Yeah, so the superficial level, which is where most of us spend most of our time mentally, that's the world of stories, beliefs, narratives, the concepts we use to make sense of things.
And that's where conflicts often arise, competing stories.
Exactly. Irreconcilable narratives clashing. But then, he says, there's a deeper, more fundamental level of meaning,
Right.
rooted in our direct awareness of the present moment, not filtered through stories or beliefs.
So not our thoughts about what's happening, but the actual experience of it. Direct attention.
Precisely. It's non-conceptual, doesn't rely on language, and he argues it can be a huge source of well-being, just being fully present.
But he admits most of us struggle to access that consistently. We often need, like, intense peak experiences.
Yeah, we tend to think profound insights only come in those big moments, intense joy, awe, even trauma sometimes.
Yep.
But Harris suggests what those moments often reveal is just the mind's inherent ability to pay full attention. And that ability isn't limited to peak moments. It's there all the time. We just don't usually tap into it.
So how do we cultivate that? He mentions meditation, mindfulness.
Yes, those are the tools he emphasizes for training attention. They help us become less identified with the constant chatter of thoughts, create a bit of space.
So we can be more present in our actual experience, not just lost in thought.
That's the goal.
He also mentions psychedelics in this context, but with a big caveat.
Right. He acknowledges they can sometimes give glimpses into different states of consciousness, maybe offer insights.
Yeah.
But he's careful to say they don't actually give us experiences the brain isn't already capable of. They just temporarily change brain chemistry.
So his focus remains on training the mind itself.
Yeah.
Understanding its capabilities.
Exactly. That's where he sees the real potential for lasting change and well-being.
Okay, shifting gears a bit to broader societal concerns. Harris expresses some pretty serious worries about where global civilization is heading.
He does. He's concerned that a big chunk of the wealthiest, most powerful people and nations are kind of losing sight of the need to maintain a stable global system.
How so?
Well, the rise of nationalism, certain kinds of populism, often involves rejecting or downplaying global responsibility, the fact that we're all interconnected.
And he lists these huge global problems that clearly need global solutions: climate change, risk of major war, AI safety.
Precisely. These aren't things one country can solve alone. They demand massive international cooperation.
But he also points to threats from adversaries, right? Actors committed to disruption.
Yes, states or groups actively working to undermine the current order, democratic values.
He frames it as this almost zero-sum contest between open societies and closed, authoritarian ones.
He sees a stark contrast, yeah. Open societies valuing democracy, rule of law, versus closed systems suppressing dissent, rejecting universal values, and these borders between them can become very dangerous, very bloody.
And he notes that totalitarianism isn't monolithic. It can be secular or religious.
Right. He mentions specific examples like Islamism or jihadism as religious forms alongside secular political ideologies that can be totalitarian.
And this is a really crucial point. How the very norms of open societies, free speech, tolerance can be weaponized against them.
That's a critical challenge. Groups with fundamentally illiberal aims can use the freedoms of an open society to spread their message and ultimately try to tear that open framework down.
So we need a smarter approach, not abandoning our values, but not being naive either.
Exactly. It requires real intelligence to navigate that without losing what makes an open society valuable.
He also worries sometimes about the political left potentially becoming unreliable on security issues. What's the concern there?
His concern is that as parts of the left are seen as unwilling to take security threats seriously enough, it might push people who prioritize safety towards right-wing authoritarian figures, even if they disagree on other things.
All these concerns seem to lead him back to this fundamental choice societies face when things get serious. Conversation versus violence.
That's right. When disagreements are deep and the stakes are high, the basic options are trying to persuade through conversation or using coercion and force.
And conversation is the bulwark, the thing stopping us from constant conflict.
It's the essential mechanism, yeah. Communication, argument, negotiation, that's what keeps us from perpetual violence, murder, war.
But online conversation, social media, that's making it harder, not easier.
That's the paradox. It often seems to hinder convergence on facts, exacerbates divisions, maybe even increases the odds of real-world violence indirectly.
He also talks about asymmetric conflict and entropy, how it's easier to break things or spread lies than build or establish truth.
That asymmetry is a huge problem. It takes less effort for bad actors to exploit openness using free speech to spread lies, for example, than it does for societies to constantly defend against it and rebuild trust.
Which makes his point about asking what people would do with power really important. It's not just what they say.
Absolutely. Understanding the likely actions is crucial for assessing risk. And he argues that tolerating extreme intolerance isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just cowardice, even potentially suicidal for an open society.
Let's loop back to something foundational for Harris. Language itself, its power in nature.
Okay. For Harris, language isn't just communication. It's the absolute foundation for human culture, complex thought, cooperation, everything.
It's how we represent the world to ourselves and others.
Exactly. And he points out most of what we know isn't from direct experience.
Right. It's stuff we're told, stuff we read, derivative knowledge.
Hugely derivative, which makes what we believe collectively incredibly important because those beliefs drive our actions, shape society.
Morality, politics.
Yeah.
It all boils down to what should we do next, based on uncertain information framed by language.
Completely. Our whole sense of better or worse outcomes is built in language. Think about the power of words hearing news of a death or a hostage situation.
Instant, profound impact. Just words.
But only if you believe them, right?
Yeah.
He talks about belief as this gating function.
A filter.
Yeah. If you don't believe the words, they don't have that emotional or behavioral power over you. Belief lets the information in, determines its impact.
He even connects the physical world, the built environment, back to language.
Right. Buildings, roads, infrastructure, they all started as ideas, communicated through language, then made real.
And ideologies, too. Racism, fascism, democracy, environmentalism. He calls them tissues of sentences.
Frameworks built entirely out of language, yeah.
Then he distinguishes rational beliefs from dogmatism. Rational beliefs are
grounded in arguments, evidence, semantic knowledge. And crucially, they're falsifiable. You're willing to change your mind if the evidence changes.
Whereas dogmatism is?
Yeah, holding on to beliefs regardless of evidence. He sees it as an intellectual sin, inherently divisive because it shuts down open, fact-based conversation.
Okay, so despite all these challenges, he outlines fragmented information, cooperation breakdowns, dogmatism. He still offers some basis for hope. Where does that come from?
Well, one key thing is recognizing that a lot of our suffering is self-inflicted through the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we cling to.
And those stories are tissue thin. They can change.
That's the hopeful part, yeah. Beliefs can change. He also echoes thinkers like David Deutsch, the idea that human ingenuity with knowledge and cooperation can solve almost any problem.
He also stresses compassion, right? Recognizing everyone wants to thrive.
Yeah, deep down, people want to flourish, avoid suffering. Compassion means recognizing that shared desire and building societies that help make it possible for more people.
He even suggests a future that's unrecognizably good is possible, and maybe already here for some.
He does suggest that possibility. The progress we've already made is immense, even if unevenly distributed.
So we have a global responsibility to keep trying, not give up because it seems too hard.
Absolutely. He warns against disavowing that responsibility. We have to protect our ability to have fact-based conversations to understand the world so we can identify problems and course correct.
And he talks about two levels for making things better: individual and systemic.
Right. The individual level is about your own ethical code, trying to be better, more honest, cultivating virtues. That improves your own life and relationships.
And the systemic level.
That's about building institutions, incentives, laws that encourage good behavior on a large scale, even from people who might be selfish or distracted.
And we need both.
Definitely. Especially for the big planetary scale problems. Got to keep both in view.
This brings us back to understanding and training our own minds. He sees this as so central to well-being.
Hugely central. Personal well-being, for Harris, really depends on understanding our own minds, especially our constant entanglement with thoughts.
That waking dream idea.
Yeah, the endless stream of thoughts, often operating without reality checks. Meditation helps break that automatic identification with them.
Because our attention is always being pulled away, right? Past regrets, future worries, hard to be present.
Exactly. And we mistake the thoughts for me. We get taken hostage by their emotional implications.
But meditation creates distance.
It helps create space between you, the subject, and the thoughts and feelings, the objects. That gives you freedom to choose how to respond.
He also says negative emotions, while informative, have short utility half-lives. We just prolong them with thought.
Yeah, learning to just see thoughts as thoughts, emotions as emotions, without getting totally swept up in the story, that brings freedom. Think of road rage, instant capture by thought and emotion.
But it's possible to be basically happy, even amidst stress or unmet desires.
That's his point. Compare a long-term meditator finding peace in solitude versus solitary confinement being torture for an untrained mind. There's an intrinsic freedom in consciousness itself before we identify with the thoughts.
Let's dig into that, his view on the nature of consciousness itself.
Okay. He describes consciousness as the fundamental substratum of experience, the basic feeling of what it's like to be you.
And at its core, that awareness is kind of the same for everyone, despite different contents.
That's the idea. The raw awareness is similar, even if my thoughts and feelings are different from yours. Everything else, thoughts, emotions, sensations, are just passing appearances within that awareness.
Constantly changing, like processes, not fixed things.
Exactly. And he argues this underlying consciousness is already free from the problems we're trying to solve with our thinking.
So we drop back into that awareness, before reacting, before thinking.
We can find this sense of open space, maybe even connection with everything. Experience becomes more visionary, mediated by our neurology, sure, but with wide latitude for well-being regardless of circumstances.
The awareness of sadness is the same awareness as joy.
Fundamentally, yes. Dropping into that awareness itself offers tranquility. You can be aware of emotions without being defined by them.
Feeling them fully, but breaking the spell of thought about them.
Right, which can diminish their psychological grip. There's this deeper level of being beyond the thoughts and reactions where things just appear. Recognizing that can free us from a lot of imagined problems.
So you can be happy even while working on world problems before they're solved.
That's the possibility he holds out. An enduring well-being not dependent on achieving every goal.
Okay, let's shift to a really hot topic. Artificial intelligence. Harris distinguishes narrow AI from AGI.
Yeah, narrow AI is what we mostly have now, systems good at specific tasks like language models or game playing.
And AGI.
Artificial general intelligence. That's the hypothetical AI with human-like cognitive abilities across the board. Flexible learning, understanding, like us.
But he thinks AGI won't just be human level for long. It'll quickly become superhuman.
That's his prediction. Because building the individual components to human level likely means they're already faster, process more data. Once integrated, the whole system would probably leap past human general intelligence very quickly.
So human-level AGI is maybe just a brief stopover.
A transient mirage, potentially.
And AGI implies autonomy, which raises questions about consciousness.
Big questions. We don't know if consciousness would emerge, but Harris argues it's likely advanced AI, especially humanoid ones, will seem conscious to us whether they are or not.
Which brings its own set of issues.
Absolutely. Ethical, practical. And he sees two main levels of risk.
Yeah.
One is bad actors using powerful AI for harmful purposes. The other is the alignment problem.
Ah, yes, the alignment problem. Explain that simply.
It's the huge challenge of making sure a truly autonomous, potentially superhuman AI stays aligned with human values and goals. How do we ensure its motivations don't diverge from ours in dangerous ways?
Like how would ants feel about human construction projects? That kind of analogy.
Sort of, yeah. Creating something vastly more intelligent. How do we ensure it remains beneficial to us? And the sheer speed of AGI is destabilizing in itself.
Leading to the singularity idea. Recursive self-improvement.
That's the concept. An intelligence explosion we might not be able to control. So, building in a core concern for human well-being from the start is critical.
But building AI safely is really hard. And the current incentives might be wrong. An arms race.
He sees a genuine difficulty, yes. And the current incentives competition between companies, between nations like the US and China, they push for speed over safety often.
And geopolitically, he feels democratic nations almost have to win this race to avoid a totalitarian state getting godlike AI first.
It's a grim calculation he makes. He even suggests autonomous weapons might, counterintuitively, become ethically preferable in some cases if they're far superior to human judgment and reduce collateral damage, especially if adversaries like China are pursuing them regardless.
So the AI arms race seems unavoidable, like the nuclear one.
That's the parallel he draws. The ultimate solution is a more politically sane, cooperative world where we can step back from that race.
Which seems far off.
It does. So we need to navigate this complex path. Participate in the race responsibly, aiming to get powerful AI right before bad actors do, while simultaneously working towards that saner world order.
Finally, Harris talks about the crucial need for trustworthy media. Given everything else, this feels vital.
Absolutely vital. We need media we can trust and are right to trust to make sense of the world. Confirmation bias is strong. Curated feeds are the norm.
So we need institutions for reliable reality testing and trust in media links to trust in government science.
They're all connected, yeah. We need information channels with incentives and processes that genuinely discover and preserve truth.
But he's worried about the failure and ideological capture of many institutions.
He expresses significant concern there, yeah, which erodes public trust across the board.
And while we want to preserve valuable institutions, major newspapers, universities, journals, he notes most of us can't do our own research on everything.
Exactly. We have to rely on civilization's collective intelligence, on expertise. Media is essential. The question is how to build in those error-correcting norms.
He sees overt partisanship in media as a huge problem, a machine for self-deception.
Pretty much. He argues journalism needs to prioritize truth tracking over partisan spin.
And he's frustrated by failures he sees, like university responses post-October 7th, or what he perceives as fringe ideologies leaking into the mainstream, especially from the left.
He does voice those frustrations, yeah. He perceives a difference in how far-left versus far-right ideas have impacted elite institutions, arguing the left has gained more traction within them, sometimes detrimentally.
So he advocates for a kind of course correction in those institutions while still acknowledging the dangers from the right.
That seems to be his position, yes. A call for regaining focus on objective inquiry while managing risks from all sides.
Navigating this media landscape today, there's no easy answer, is there?
No simple algorithm, unfortunately. Increased skepticism is probably wise, awareness of biases, the potential for errors, even in supposedly objective reporting.
We need more intelligent consumption, recognizing the business models behind the news, clicks, algorithms.
Definitely. Subscription models might be better than ad-based, but even they can fall prey to audience capture, telling subscribers what they want to hear.
And what about alternative media? Podcasts, newsletters?
They can be valuable, offer different perspectives, allow creators to reach audiences directly. That's powerful. But they often still rely on traditional media for the initial reporting, the raw data. And if traditional media is cutting budgets, lowering standards, that affects everyone.
So the core principles, dispassion, source integrity, fact-checking, they still matter, regardless of the platform.
Absolutely essential for intellectual integrity, wherever you get your information.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Sam Harris's perspectives, which were definitely complex and sometimes challenging, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think it's the profound influence of beliefs, for sure. The huge challenges of navigating this fragmented information world we're in, the absolute bedrock importance of cooperation, the potential for change, both in ourselves, through understanding our minds, and in our systems. And underlying it all, this critical need for trustworthy information.
Right. So for our final provocative thought to leave everyone with, given everything we've heard about beliefs, about how fragile shared understanding can be, what's maybe one small deliberate shift you, the listener, could make? Maybe in how you consume information or how you form your own beliefs. Something that might foster a bit more clarity, maybe more connection in your own life or community.
That's a great question to mull over. Definitely something to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.